Hey, friends, welcome back to the Living Truth Podcast. This is your host, Michael Carey. And on the show today, I have Tim Stein. Tim and Jeannie Vitone has a most excellent workbook, and it's called Finding the Way Through. This workbook is a workbook for sex and pornography addiction, sobriety, recovery, and so good partner betrayal sensitivity. So I have been looking forward to this interview for several months when I got to hang out with Tim down in Nashville, Tennessee at a conference. And so that was such a blast. So, Tim, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
It's good to see you again, Michael. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I
Mhm.
love having these conversations, not just about the book, but about sobriety, recovery, and helping people to change their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And the stories behind all of that, I'm sure, are so incredible. Of how do we get to becoming a counselor, running a counseling office, writing books, making these
Yeah.
contributions to the world. There's always a story behind it. But I just wanted to ask you and open up with what brought the two of you together. I think you both run a counseling practice together, right? And then you decided to write this workbook. How did that all come into play?
We do. Well, I got into this work in my own recovery. So, as I was doing my own recovery, and I was a therapist at the time, I realized how life-changing it was for me. And then I had a few people that came in that were wanting to continue to work with me, and that just rapidly grew. Um, as I was working primarily with the addicts, I realized I didn't understand the partners. Um, that side of the fence was not resonating with me, and I wasn't really able to give them what they needed. But Jeannie and I were in a consultation group together, and she had a lot of background in trauma, and I really respected her clinically. And so I said, "Hey, let me give you a couple books around sex addiction and read them and let me know what you think because I've got these partners that I don't know what to do with." And so she read about them and then she came back and said, "Well, I don't know what this like co-addict thing is, but when I see this, I see a lot of trauma, which is what makes sense to me. So send me a couple people, let's see where we go." So I sent a couple partners to her and it worked out beautifully. So, for a while we just ran our private practices and shared some clients, and then we started working under the same umbrella. And so we've been working as Willow Tree Counseling since somewhere around 2010, 2011. We brought more people in because what we did really resonated. This book came out of the groups that we run. So very early on, um, I I realized that I couldn't see all the people that were wanting to come work and get some help. And so I started running groups. And there were a number of curriculums that we used, but we very quickly realized that they were missing some things. And so we started having books that we used as textbooks to give people education and information, but we started creating our own manual to go along with them. And then we just kept adjusting it. I think by the time we got around to putting this book together, we were on version 13. Um, and then we decided, well, we find this work really effective with the people we're working with. Let's put something together with that's more formal that we can give to other people. And part of that was, well, let's write our own text about what we really think is effective and helpful. And we want people to know, if you get nothing else, this is what we want you to get walking out of here to help you with your sobriety and your recovery. So
Hmm.
this book has really been like a 15-year process in the making.
Hmm. Makes total sense, yeah. And all the different tools and things that you've been teaching everyone now, you just have it all under one cover so that you
Yep.
get to hand that to them and work through that. So that's beautiful rather than a compilation of a bunch of different things and teaching firsthand. There's so much to cover. And I know this idea of recovery, addiction recovery, is elusive to some people in the beginning, especially. They don't know the root cause. They don't know where things come from. They don't know why they behave the way they do. And so it can be complicated, um, yet simple at the same time. But there's phrases like sobriety that can mean different things to different people. So in the workbook, yeah, how do you guys define sobriety in the context of sex and porn addiction? What makes that different? Is that different and unique compared to like substance abuse?
It is. We tend to follow more the SAA model of sobriety. So, we often have people create their own circles. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the SAA model, it's a like a bullseye of circles. In the inner circle, the very middle, is if you do these behaviors, you've relapsed. And then the next circle out, we call the middle circle, is if you do these behaviors, not a relapse, but this is gray area. It's leading towards your relapse. It's problematic. And in that circle, we also include experiences. It may not be that I've done a shady behavior that I'm not calling a relapse, but it's problematic. It might be an experience. I've got a presentation coming up that I'm anxious about. My wife and I had a fight. I had a flat tire, and I'm just sort of at my wit's end on my way home. Not things that we've chosen, but that bring up stress and anxiety and uncomfortable emotions and make you vulnerable. And then the outer circle is what are activities that you can do to keep yourself grounded, solid, on track, and support your own sobriety, recovery, and mental health. So when it comes to defining sobriety, it's tricky with sex addiction because, like with drugs and alcohol, if you drink alcohol, you've relapsed.
Hmm.
With sex addiction, it's a little bit more tricky because there are so many different ways that sexually addictive behavior gets expressed. For some people, and I will say I'm not a fan of pornography, but I'm not anti-pornography. So I will say for some people, pornography, and that's the majority of the people that we work with, pornography is absolutely problematic.
Hmm.
For other people, it doesn't really have any energy at all, but they're off doing other behaviors like exhibitionism or voyeurism or paying for sex.
Hmm.
And so it's one of these things where we have people figure out, well, what are your addictive behaviors? And we don't let them do that on their own because addicts are not always the most truthful with themselves. And they find a lot of loopholes on, well, I think it's okay cuz. So that's often work that they do with their other peers, other people who hold them accountable and look in with their sponsor if they're involved in a 12-step meeting. Um, and so it's, well, what are the behaviors that are really your addiction? For the most people that have what I call the trifecta, which is porn, masturbation, and fantasy, we put porn and masturbation in the inner circle. We typically put fantasy in the middle circle, unless they're unable to hold boundaries on their fantasy. And then we talk about how do we define middle circle fantasy versus outer circle or inner circle fantasy. Um, for other people, paying for sex, sex outside their marriage, depending on what they're struggling with. But it's
Hmm.
really important for each person to figure out what are my addictive behaviors, and let me make sure I get them all. Because if you
Hmm.
get them all, you're going to set yourself up to fail. Like my trifecta guys, it's not uncommon that when they come in through the door the first time, they're like, I don't know what's going on with pornography. I'm addicted to it. I keep trying to stop and I keep going back to it. And then when we
Hmm.
start exploring it, we realize that actually their addiction is pornography, masturbation, and fantasy. And they keep letting themselves masturbate and going into fantasies. And that keeps feeding their addiction pattern, which eventually pulls them back to pornography. And so
Yeah.
it's one of these pieces where, okay, we're going to help you to sort of figure out what your behaviors are that are really addictive, but we're also going to push you to make sure we get them all. Because if you miss
Hmm.
something and you let yourself keep going there, you're really eroding the foundation of what you're trying to build.
Hmm. Completely true. Yes. And that makes perfect sense because when you're talking about fantasy, so many of us played the pornography that we saw in our mind anyway. And
Yep.
so I think in many ways, brain science says that the brain doesn't know the difference sometimes, if it's real, if
Exactly.
it's actually happening, am I a part of this or what's going on? interesting facts there. So,
Yeah. And when it comes to fantasy, because you're right, the brain doesn't know what's happening inside versus outside. And so if you're an addict and you let yourself go into that fantasy, I may not call that a relapse, but you're definitely impacting the neurology, because what we're really trying to do is change your neurology so your brain functions like a recovery brain. And if you keep going into fantasy, you're keeping the addictive neural processing going. Um,
mhm,
and where we talk about this, I'll tell people, look, there's going to be those days where addictive thoughts or euphoric recall or whatever comes up, and you put your mental boundaries in place, whatever those might be, and you can move on and leave that behind. And there are going to be days where those same things come into your head and you go to your mental boundaries and you try to put them in place. And for whatever reason, those thoughts are just sticky that day. You're trying to
mhm,
move away and they're coming back and you're letting go of them and they're just hanging around. And I will tell people there's a huge difference neurologically between this thought is coming up and I'm struggling against it versus this thought is coming up and I am actively engaged and embracing.
mhm.
Uh,
Right.
And so if somebody is actively engaging and embracing it, we have a whole conversation because that's going to be kryptonite for their sobriety if they're trying to get there.
Hmm. Kryptonite. Yeah, absolutely. So, just like the alcohol is for the alcoholic, yeah, kryptonite might be a little different
Yeah.
depending on the different behaviors. So you have to explore that and dive in and understand the behavior and what they're
Yeah.
really what their patterns are. Sounds like
Well,
what you're saying.
and
Hmm.
as human beings, we're sexual beings, so we're wired for sexuality, and sexuality shows up in all kinds of different ways. So, like for an alcoholic, if they're not drinking, but they're having lunch in the bar, they're putting themselves in an environment where they're very, very vulnerable. As sex
Hmm.
addicts, there's sexually charged information around us all the time. And so
Hmm.
we have to figure out, okay, so what are the boundaries I hold? What am I doing? Where's this line where like I'm trying to engage in my own sexuality, which is a normal human thing. And so I'm trying to
Hmm.
develop a healthy relationship with the very same thing that I'm addicted to. And so
Hmm.
where's that line where it moves out of like absolutely healthy sexuality into, okay, this is healthy but vulnerable and I have to be careful with it, to, well, yeah, this is a sexual behavior, but this is definitely my addiction. And that gets a little bit more complicated than if alcohol crosses your lips, you drink.
Hmm. Yes. Makes perfect sense for sure. So this is really good segue into what I was going to ask you next about the addict thinking versus recovery thinking, and what you've kind of been describing. What are my boundaries? Exploring that would fall in that line of recovery thinking. I'm assuming, right? But yeah, what? How do you explain these two, and what's the difference between addict thinking and recovery thinking?
Addict thinking and recovery thinking come out of a concept called first order change and second order change. And in first order change, it's like if you think about there's a larger problem, like I've got a shed in my backyard and there's a leak in the roof, and the leak keeps dripping on my box of tools, which keep getting rusty.
Hmm.
First order change is how do I fix the immediate problem? I move the box of tools so that they're not in the drip and I clean them off so they're not rusty. First order change, my tools are no longer wet and I can use them. Great. However, I still have this leak in my roof, and I guarantee it's going to be creating other problems.
Hmm.
Second order change is not fix the immediate problem. Second order change is why is the immediate problem happening? And what do I need to do to fix that? And so when we apply that to addiction recovery, addict thinking is usually what do I need to do to feel comfortable right now? And recovery thinking is, well, what's really going on and how do I lean into this to create deeper, more meaningful, lasting change? And
Hmm.
so, like, you were earlier referencing the chart in our book. So, like,
Hmm.
addict thinking is nobody knows and nobody will find out. I'm convincing myself and I'm feeling more comfortable right now.
Mm-hmm.
Recovery thinking is secrets always come out. So
Mm-hmm.
even though my brain might be telling me go do this, or my brain might be saying, don't tell anybody this happened,
Mm-hmm.
am I willing to tolerate something that's uncomfortable in the moment because I know that the change in the foundation it's going to create is much stronger?
Mm-hmm.
And so when we, as addicts in recovery, are willing to tolerate discomfort immediately because we know it will create a stronger foundation for our sobriety, our recovery, our relationship, our life,
Mm-hmm.
that's
Mm-hmm.
really when we're leaning into recovery thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yeah, there is a chart for those who are watching on video in the workbook here where they explore this in depth. The But I loved some of those examples. I thought were so good. I wanted to ask you maybe if you could give an example of responses to you mentioned I had an argument with my wife. Okay, I got a flat tire. I mean, some of those scenarios that you said, I think this is so cool to unpack. What would the addictive thinking versus recovery? I mean, does this applies to all the different experiences that we have that we perceive as negative, right? That are
Oh, it does.
harmful, we think in our life, like an argument with our spouse.
It shows up in all kinds of ways. I mean, and let me give you a couple examples. I mean, let's say that let's go in progressing order. I'm hanging around today and my addict is just in my head and I'm having a really hard day. Addict thinking is I'm not going to tell anybody about this because I'm embarrassed that this is happening and I don't want anybody to know and think worse about me.
Mm-hmm.
Recovery thinking is I'm having a rough day and it's uncomfortable, but I need to pick up the phone and I need to call guys in program and I need to talk to them about what's going on. And if appropriate, I need to share this with my partner.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Addict thinking is I've had a relapse. Well, I relapsed and I've cleaned my history and nobody's really ever going to find out about that. And so I don't need to tell anybody. And I don't want to tell anybody
Mm-hmm.
because I don't want to reset my sobriety date because that is painful and uncomfortable for me. So I'm going to pretend that it didn't happen. I'm not going to tell anyone.
Right.
Recovery thinking is, yeah, nobody might find out, but they're eventually going to find out. It always comes out. And I have to humble myself and I need to tell guys in program that this happened. I need to ask for their help to get me back on track. And I
Mm-hmm.
probably need to, if I'm in a relationship, I have to let my partner know that I had a
Mm-hmm.
relapse and then what that means.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Addict thinking is I'm angry and I'm feeling resentful with my partner about something that's going on. And addict thinking is either I'm just going to let her have it because I have a right to my emotions and I can just tell her everything.
Mm-hmm.
Or addict thinking on the other side might be I'm not going to tell her anything. I'm
Mm-hmm.
just going to pretend that everything is fine because I don't want to rock the boat and I don't want her to be upset with me. And goodness knows she's already angry. So just not going to say anything.
Mm-hmm.
Recovery thinking is I'm going to share with my wife what's going on with me, what my anger's about. But before I do that, I'm going to call some guys to make sure I really understand what I'm really feeling because
Yeah.
my brain is a dangerous place. I should not go there by myself because I jump to conclusions that are not rational frequently.
Uh-huh.
So I talk to them. I figure out, is this something that is really appropriate to share with my wife? And then with a respectful boundary, I share it with my wife. And that whole process is often not comfortable because we are, as addicts, our addict thrives in secrecy. Our addict thrives in, I'll help you feel better right now. Our addict is, I can get you through it. Don't worry about it. And recovery thinking
Mm-hmm.
is, we need to be transparent. We need to be
Right.
respectful. We need to be able to have some resilience and find that comfort in discomfort. And it's a different mindset. I have also found that the more that we do it, the more comfortable we become. It's one of those things
Hmm.
like I've um I've started ending my showers with cold water. It's something I read in a book and I found it helpful. And when I first started doing that, the cold water was quite a shock and very uncomfortable. But the more that I do it, the more it moves from a shock to, oh, that's kind of refreshing.
Mm.
And my experience is when we lean into transparency, when we lean into rigorous honesty, when we lean into asking people to guide us, at first it feels like that cold water shock. But the
Mm.
more that we do it, the more comfortable it feels, even though we may not always look forward to it.
Right.
It doesn't have the same shock and resistance it had before.
Hmm. Yeah.
And recovery thinking is essential. If you can't lean into recovery thinking, you're really hamstringing your chances of like real life change, which I mean, I assume that we all know this, that life change doesn't come because you're sober. Sober's necessary, but it's not sufficient to change your life.
Mm.
Life change is going to come because you're sober and you lean into recovery. And recovery is
Hmm.
what's going to change your life. Recovery is what's going to help you move beyond the chaos that your addiction has created. And recovery thinking is one of those gateways and supports to that life change.
Yeah. Absolutely. So many nuggets in there that you mentioned, and I heard my wife say that many years ago. She said, "I treat my mind like a bad neighborhood. I never go there alone." That
Yes.
when you mentioned that, I had that similar thought. But it is so true. But what you're just to comment and riff on what you were saying, it's like when you have a clean slate and you
Mhm.
don't have any secrets, and then if you have a slip or relapse and these kind of things happen, to hide it, I think the addict inside tells us, you know what? I got away with that one. It's looking interesting again. I'm sure I could just go ahead and do it. What's one more time going to hurt? And that it would be the addictive thinking in the cycle, but it's so refreshing. Okay, I don't think that I'm going to try the cold temperature at the end of the showers, but when I think of refreshing, I'm thinking of a nice hot shower as
Yeah.
refreshing. But that's maybe a cold glass of lemonade on a really hot summer day. The idea is being free requires that kind of vulnerability, doesn't it? And it is refreshing to not have any secrets.
It does. And again, it's that if we're talking addict thinking, recovery thinking, the addict thinking, like you said, is I'm not going to say it. I got away with it. Everything's fine. I'm going to keep it smooth. I'm not going to tell her anything. And recovery thinking, it's that awareness of, okay, I need to be rigorously honest. I need to be open. That's going to be uncomfortable. But the foundation gets built because one of the things that I have seen repeatedly with the couples that come into our office is when the addict only tells their partner, hey, things are good. Things are great. Things are fine. It doesn't mean anything.
Right.
When they say, here's my struggle. I'm having a rough time, but here's what I'm doing about it. Here's how I'm working my program.
Hmm.
That gives those and your partner knows that things aren't always perfect, but you're working your program. Then when you have those days that are really solid and you come and you say, yeah, no, today's a good day. Suddenly it has a different kind of weight. I was running a retreat last
Hmm.
weekend and one of the gentlemen put it in terms of um, if you're an investor in a company. So if you're investing in a company and you're talking to the CEO and you're like,
Hmm.
oh, how is everything going? How's it coming with this company I've invested in? And the CEO says, oh, everything's fine. Everything's really good. You're not going to feel terribly good about your investment.
Hmm.
If that CEO says, well, here are the parts that are going really well, and here are the parts
Hmm.
that are kind of challenged right now, and here's where I could use your help. That company and that investment is going to feel very, very different. And
Hmm.
to be able to share that is recovery thinking because it's, I'm being vulnerable. I'm telling you it's not perfect. I don't know how you're going to react to that. But
Hmm.
by being vulnerable and leaning in that way, I'm
Yeah.
giving my partner the opportunity to lean in and appreciate her investment in a very different way, which
Hmm.
strengthens the foundation we built and makes it
Hmm.
more solid. And so,
Hmm.
you know, in many ways, addict thinking, recovery thinking really does come down to, do I want to feel comfortable right now in this moment?
Hmm.
Or do I want to create a solid foundation that's going to keep building on itself moving forward, even though
Right.
it's going to be uncomfortable?
Growth and change is uncomfortable. Yeah. And I know you mentioned there's a little bit of a story behind this, but the recovery traits,
Oh,
how
yeah.
many have you discovered? How did you come about this? And basically, what you were mentioning, rigorous honesty, I'm sure is one of those recovery traits. But yeah, can you give a little feedback on that?
Well, we identified 40 recovery traits. And I will say that I do not believe that 40 is the exhaustive list. It's just the
Mm,
list that we came up with.
wow.
But we came up with those years ago. I wrote a meditation book. I wrote a daily meditation book for addicts and sex addicts in recovery called Gifts of Recovery. And so when
Mm,
I finished that meditation book, one of the things that I did is I sat down and I looked through what are all the themes because I was identifying the themes that each meditation talked about. And so I identified, well, what are the major themes that as I'm writing in this book, I keep circling back to?
mm,
And at the same time, I was reading through some of Patrick Carnes' work. And there was a couple exercises he had done that were journal type exercises. And I looked through those as well. And I'm like, okay, well, what are the themes that he's coming up with? And I looked at some other addiction workbooks and writings. And I just started looking at, well, what are the themes? And there's so much crossover amongst all of those books. And when I pulled them out as, well, here are the themes that I'm seeing that in my writing, in Patrick Carnes' writing, in the writing of these other people that I have a lot of respect for, here are these traits that we all seem to be talking about in different ways, in different styles, but these traits, bubble up in different ways in different places, but almost across the board.
hmm.
And so I identified those and put them in a list, and we started talking about them as, well, here are 40 recovery traits that you got to lean into. And
Hmm.
not, it's kind of impossible to memorize them all, but giving addicts the opportunity to just sort of like, hey, here's a trait that is essential for recovery. How does that fit for you in your life?
Hmm.
How are you doing? Is there an area you need to work on it? Hey, here's a trait that's showing up, and here's another one. And these
Hmm.
traits, let me pull up a couple. I've got them here in the back. Are things like addicts exercise persistence.
Hmm.
They don't give up. They're persistent. They keep going on the path. They live a balanced life. They seek moderation in all things. They seek win-win situation solutions. They seek healthy sexuality.
Hmm.
They cultivate courage. They balance their life and their relationships. So there
Hmm.
were a whole bunch of these themes that we identified and eventually put together and said, this is a
Hmm.
pretty solid list. If you can lean into
Hmm.
these 40 things, you've got a pretty
Hmm.
solid foundation for what you're trying to do.
Hmm. And Tim, that sounds like maybe another great writing project there, another devotional maybe, or yeah,
Good.
what you were talking about. Yeah, 40 days, one trait per day. Anyway, yes, hint, hint, suggestion, ask.
I love it. I have a couple other books that are floating in my head, but I think that one, I'll keep it in mind.
I understand that. You've got that the mental list going on there. Another topic here that I want to make sure that we touch on is partner betrayal sensitivity. And it's
Yeah.
at the end of the subtitle here, the book, the tagline, and the workbook. And it's so important that this is included. So every chapter is I read so many of them and wasn't sure. And you had affirmed that every single chapter has a section on partner betrayal sensitivity. Can you just explain what do you mean by that first off?
Yeah.
What does that mean? Partner betrayal sensitivity.
Well, like I said, Jeannie and I, when we started working together, I was mostly doing the addict work and she was doing the partner work. And she very early on realized that there's trauma going on and how essential it was that we started a conversation within the coupleship about the trauma and about the recovery process and sobriety and what's going on. And so she very early on, and I think we talked about this earlier, came up with the analogy of a fence because from her brain, she's like, I'm working with these women, and I'll talk about men and women. That's typically the
Yeah.
pattern. Men are the addicts and women are the partners. But we've certainly
Hmm.
seen, that gets flipped and women are addicts and sometimes the men are the partners. And if you're in a
Yeah.
homosexual relationship, it looks a little different. Um,
Hmm.
but Jeannie was working with all these women, and
Hmm.
what came to light for her was this idea of stay on your side of the street. It might work with alcohol and drugs, but when you've got this deep, deep betrayal, this sexual wound that's happening, and you're married to this person, there's a whole different kind of urgency on I need to know what's going on. And we at the same time needed to build the idea of, but there's a barrier. It's not going to be helpful if the partner's in there trying to do the addict's work or tell the addict how to do their work. And so Jeannie shifted it.
Hmm.
We're not going to talk about being on the other side of the street. We're going to talk about being on the other side of the fence. And you've got
Hmm.
your yard and they've got their yard. And she talks about it as visualizing it as a little, like a 4 foot picket fence. And you can
Hmm.
fence and you can talk about your yard and what you're doing, and they can look at the other yard and how it's coming and how my yard might be impacting their yard. And you can just start having a conversation around that.
Hmm.
Out of those coming to the fence pieces came the idea that we have to understand the vocabulary on both sides. Everybody,
Hmm.
Jeannie and I are both trained in working with addicts and partners. Everybody that works with us here at Willow Tree is trained on the addict side and the partner side. And the partner sensitivity is really about helping the addict in their own work to be able to understand what's going on the other side of the fence. Hey, as you're working on putting these things together, here's what's going on with your partner that you may not understand, that may make
Hmm.
sense to you. You might be like, hey, I've been sober for 3 months. Why is she still upset? And we just find that when we can educate addicts about, hey, here's what's going on with your partner, it helps them so much. I mean, the two examples that come to mind for me are one, when addicts have been sober for a while, and I will sort of walk them in and say, okay, so here's what you have to understand. You're going to get your 3 month chip, and that's great. And you're going to come to me, and I'm going to praise and say, awesome, good job. And you're going to go to the meeting where you get the chip. They're going to say that's wonderful, fabulous. And you're going to come to group here, and we're going to say wonderful and great. And then you're going to go home to your partner, which you should do, and say, look, I got my 3 month chip. And what you have to understand is that your partner's thought process is going to be great. It's been 3 months since you sexually betrayed me.
Hmm. Right.
And
Hmm.
so you have to understand that what this represents to your partner is
Hmm.
very different than what it represents to you and other people. And that doesn't mean she won't appreciate it, but she's not going to be your cheerleader. And
Yeah.
helping addicts to understand what something represents.
Hmm.
You didn't relapse on sex addiction, but you kept secret that you were sneaking junk food at lunch, which is again, a diet plan that you and your partner have together.
Hmm.
And it's not that sneaking junk food was really that big of a deal, but it's a secret.
Hmm.
And to your partner, a secret represents what was going on in your addiction. And of course, it's going to bring up all of our trust issues about what was happening before. And so when
Yeah.
addicts can understand, oh, this is where that reaction is coming from, they
Hmm.
can lean in a very different way. I'm kind of fond of telling addicts, I'm never going to tell you that your partner is always going to be kind, respectful, understanding, from a neutral perspective, appropriate, because there's going to be
Hmm.
times when their trauma overwhelms them, and they're not going to be.
Yeah.
But regardless of how inappropriate or unkind their behavior may be, can you understand where it's coming from and why it makes sense to them in that moment?
Hmm.
And when they understand that, they're starting to develop empathy. They're strengthening their relational skills that show up not only in their relationship with their partner, but with family and friends and coworkers.
Hmm.
And it leans into recovery stuff. And suddenly life starts changing. But it starts
Hmm.
with, let me educate you about what's going on with your partner.
Hmm.
It also, when we educate them in
Hmm.
the other person's language, it gives the relationships a more solid chance. I was
Hmm.
trained back in the day when we would say the addict has to do their individual work and the partner does their individual work, and we're not even going to bring them together for
Hmm.
6 months at the most because we gotta get these two solid first. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, that was I understood where we were coming from as a treatment community, but what we learned as we went along that way was, oh, we're unfortunately walking people further apart and we're making their relational healing more difficult.
Hmm.
So we very early on adjusted that to, well, let's bring them together and let's do some couples work, not at the exclusion of individual work, but to give them an ability to heal their relationship. And as a part of
Hmm.
that, in our individual work, we're going to educate about what's going on the other side.
Hmm.
This book in particular is about having sensitivity to the partner's experience and how their betrayal trauma is impacting them. When we're working with partners, we're doing the opposite of education. We're educating them about, well, here's what's going on in the addict, and here's what their sobriety and recovery looks like, and here's the road bumps that they're going to be hitting that are going to scare you, but they're actually signs of progress. And
Hmm.
when partners have an understanding about what the addict journey looks like, and when addicts have an understanding of the partner journey, they develop more resilience and tolerance for the other person's struggles. And then as a relationship, they're able to find their way through. So not only does it strengthen their individual process, but it also strengthens their relational process.
Hmm.
We have a lot of pride in this book, and particularly integrating the partner sensitivity information into the addict workbook. We've actually
Hmm.
done one of the things that we hadn't planned. I'm kind of going off at a tangent. I hope that's okay. But one
Oh
of the
yeah.
things that we hadn't planned that we found is that a number of the couples in our program came in and said, we're sitting down about once a week and we're reading through the partner sensitivity section together, and then we're having a
Hmm.
conversation about it, and we're finding it really helpful in our own
Wow.
healing process, which
Hmm.
we thought that's wish we'd thought of that, but I'm really glad that they're finding it helpful in that way. So there's some really cool stuff
Hmm.
people are doing with the information we put in this book to support
Hmm.
not only the addict's journey, but also the relational journey and being able to support the partner's journey.
Hmm. So yeah, when you're when you're talking about bringing the couple together, you're not in the beginning of this journey, you're not talking about traditional marriage counseling where you're talking about all the baggage and grievances and everything that they're
So,
bringing up, but you're focusing on the current problem that's right in front of them, right? I'm sure
yeah.
that's
We kind of shorthand talk about it as we're not doing traditional therapy. We're doing more elephant therapy. There's this big stinky elephant in the
Mhm.
middle of the room, and we're
Yeah.
helping you understand, talk about your experience of it and manage it. We're not
Hmm.
looking into like commitment and deep vulnerability. We're just helping you guys navigate
Hmm.
and find your way through this elephant-filled room until it
Right.
shrinks down and it becomes more manageable. And then you can figure out where you want to go with your relationship and what feels safe to you at that time.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I just wanted to raise that because I know so many guys I hear in the beginning talk about that, when are we going to be able to talk about her problems? It's like, well, you know, this is the path that you're on, and the
Yeah.
reality that you're in right now is just like you said it beautifully, 3 months of sobriety. Okay, great. 3 months since you cheated on me. I mean, this is the current reality is what you have to deal with until you get to a stage where the other parts. I love that the
And,
elephant in the room. Yeah.
and I'll also go back to addict thinking, recovery thinking, because addict thinking is, well, we need to deal with her stuff because her stuff is really creating the problem. And addict
Hmm.
thinking is, I have to try, recovery thinking is, I trust that she's doing her work in her own way, which may not be at the pace or the way that I would like her to do it. And I'm going to focus on my recovery and my own healing and walking my path as cleanly as I can
Hmm.
and sharing my experience with her and trusting that she'll share her experience with me. And if we need help with that, we have people who can help us. But this is uncomfortable. I have to have patience and tolerance and be okay with the bumps. And I'm trusting
Hmm.
to find our way through instead of let me tell you what you need to work on to make it better. And, in my moments, I would
Hmm.
say, yeah, that's really emotional manipulation of your partner to try to make her emotional state more comfortable for you.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's back to the analogy of the fence. Staying on your side of the fence is a beautiful way to picture it. Yeah, I love that. And comparison to the street, well, you're a lot farther away. I mean, yeah, I loved hearing you guys talk about that. That's beautiful. So well, I need to wrap up, although I'm so thoroughly enjoying this conversation. So, if is there any closing thoughts that you have, or any resources you want to direct our listeners to aside from Amazon and get a copy of the
Yeah.
workbook, Finding the Way Through?
Yeah, Finding the Way Through is available on Amazon. The resources. I also do another podcast with Jeannie and also Dan Drake and Wendy Conquest called Conversations on Sex, Addiction, and Relationships. And you hear us talk about all kinds of stuff on there. Um, but mostly, I mean, my closing thoughts are if you're picking up this workbook as an addict, I I hope you find it helpful. And what I hope you find helpful is not just that we walk you through a very thorough process to get sober, but I hope you find it helpful because we're also walking you through a process of developing empathy, sensitivity, and understanding for your partner, and also walking you into life-changing recovery
Mm,
patterns, which is really where the gifts of recovery show up and where your life is going to change. So
right.
don't short change yourself and stop at just getting sober. All the good stuff comes after that.
It really is kind of just getting out of the starting blocks, isn't it? To
Oh
the
yeah.
real depth of the change that can take place in someone's heart and their life. Yes. Beautiful. Thanks so much for being on the podcast, Tim. Really appreciate your time and your wisdom and this beautiful contribution of this workbook. Thanks so much.
You're so welcome, Michael. Thank you for having me on. It was such a pleasure.